You didn't know if you couldn't see, but wasn't there. And but nobody, very few people knew it except for a couple people. I understand how they're skeptical. That's why it was so amazing a few years ago when exactly what that man award because I invited the entire North Carolina. Five, he was a wife. He was. Put that in your bag of tricks. Like this wife. That's the whole story. My favorite one is the inauguration of the trying to get the ambulance. There's nothing to Washington State. Everybody thinks they're more important than anybody else. Look at the ambulance. Somebody could have been dying there. My daughter's from right on the sidewalk.
President, United Healthcare,
Right.
military attendants. Thanks, Joan. Appreciate that.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for being with us today for our really terrifically exciting program we're going to have on modernization in healthcare. My name is Bob Fiedler. I head up our Defense Education Forum. We do 40 to 60 programs a year on a variety of topics, and we'd like to invite all of you to come back for future programs. They can be found on our website, and just note that we have one next week on the QDR. It should be a terrific program. We've got some of the leading think tank speakers in Washington coming for that program, and it'll be down on our 4th floor on the 14th of March. We've got another program for those of you who are interested in civil affairs and military governance on 21 March at the George Mason University. This will be our 24th program with George Mason on this topic. Again, all of you are welcome to attend that. It's my pleasure to, one administrative announcement, please. Cell phones, either turn them off or mute them. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our Executive Director, Major General Retired Andrew Davis.
Following your lead, Bob. We have a rule: if a cell phone goes off in a Defense Education Forum, it's an automatic $50 donation to our ROA Stars Foundation.
Everybody leave your phones on.
That's our treasurer speaking, Dr. Austin. Well, as Bob said, I'm Drew Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Reserve Officers Association, and I guess technically your host for this very important session on the future of military health care. For those of you who have not been in our building, this is the Minuteman Memorial Building that was acquired, the land was acquired, and the money raised and the building constructed between 1965 and 1969 by that fellow on the back wall in the center in the boots and saddles Army uniform. Anybody with gray hair should recognize him. That was Lieutenant General Lewis B. Hershey, who was the most feared man among people of my age cohort in those days because he was head of the draft. And I beat the draft by enlisting in the Marine Corps. That was pretty smart, wasn't it? we have a pretty rich 92-year history of the Reserve Officers Association that was founded in 1922 by General Blackjack Pershing of the Army. And the other picture on the back was one of our other plank holders, as we say in the Sea Service, a young major in the Missouri National Guard, Harry Truman. So we're really proud of our history, but now we're looking forward. And one of the new technology, I suppose it's not even hard technology items, you can't come to one of our functions without a commercial. Richard, do we have that slide up there? With the early bird being shot out of the sky 2 years ago almost, we launched the ROA Smart Brief, which is a daily news feed of the 10 most important stories about defense of the day. It's free. You don't have to be a member of ROA. All you have to do is give us your email address, your banking information, your social security number. No, just your email address. And at 2 o'clock every afternoon, you get a digest of the 10 most important stories of the day. And we've got about 15,000 subscribers now, and no one doesn't like it, which is great. Again, looking to the future, the topic today is modernizing healthcare, private sector, DoD, and VA innovations in action. It's obviously a very important and dynamic field that's in a constant state of change. Military medicine and civilian medicine are both unique, but obviously overlap, and innovations on the battlefield find their way into civilian care and vice versa. But there are gaps, and we're very mindful of the gaps, particularly in the last 12 years of war, between military medicine and VA medicine and civilian medicine. We had our ROA Stars Foundation fundraising gala last night, and a part of it were vignettes, personal stories told by reservists who have been impacted in the last 12 years by deployments. And we had a very poignant personal story of a young couple, Army Reserve captain, 2 tours of deployment, who on his second tour to Afghanistan, his wife prematurely delivered twins, and it didn't go so well. One didn't survive, and one survived, and the one that survived was $1 million baby. It literally cost $1 million to save the baby's life, and now the baby's thriving. TRICARE stood up and covered all the costs but $100 of $1 million. And they apologized in their letter, their bill, for the $100 that wasn't covered. So the need is great. Modernization of the health system is truly critical, and we have the leaders in the field here to tell us how and point to the way forward. Our keynote speaker is Dr. Jonathan Woodson, a great friend of ROA, who has joined us on several previous occasions dealing with healthcare. He is a Brigadier General also in the United States Army Reserve. And this being a small world, my father-in-law is an eminent vascular surgeon, as is Dr. Woodson. And Dr. Woodson remembers my father-in-law's books. I'd also like to express my deep appreciation to United Health Group for sponsoring today's program. It's been a pleasure working with Tracy Malone. Tracy, I've seen you. And in building this program, Tracy's with the Washington office. And we're really fortunate to have the president of Military and Veterans for United Healthcare, Tina Jonas. Tina, thank you. They really stepped up to the plate to sponsor our gala last night and are the benefactors of this forum. So thank you very much. You may also remember Tina's name as the person behind the money at the Pentagon. Good place to be. Maybe not so much these days. We also have Dr. Richard McGlory. I know, there you are. And Craig Cutswell. thank you very much for your support and your assistance in organizing this. It's now my pleasure to introduce our National Health Services Officer, Dr. Bob Kasulke. Dr. Kasulke is also a retired United States Army Reserve Major General who retired from the Reserve as the commander of the Army Reserve Medical Command. In his civilian life, he is a practicing physician focusing on adult care in upstate New York. He is also the international president of an organization called CIOMR, the Confederation of Inter-Allied Officers of Medical Reserve, in whatever that is in French, if anybody's a French speaker. And we're really fortunate. ROA is the U.S. delegate to CIOR and CIOMR, and we'll be hosting the International Congress of those organizations here in Washington, D.C., July 26 to 30, 2015, the Wardman Park Marriott. You can put it in your calendars now, and there will be a robust CME, maybe at Walter Reed Bethesda. Bob and I also have shared death in the last year and have been brought back to life by the civilian and military medical system and lived to tell about it, and we're proud to be here. Bob?
He's Lazarus 1, I'm Lazarus 2. Hey, thank you. Before I make some remarks, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of several other folks here. Dr. Cowan, are you here? Here. Mike, okay. Mike Cowan is the executive director of AMSIS, and thank you for coming. In the back of the room, they were in the back before, we have Lieutenant General Robb, who's a DHA, and the assistant to Dr. Robb, or Lieutenant General Robb, is Brigadier General Balazek. I thought my name was hard to pronounce. Yours is okay. And I think the setup for this meeting is pretty straightforward. There are many changes occurring in the world of medicine, both in healthcare delivery, management, provision of healthcare. There's a magnificent leap in the speed at which medical technology has grown. Medical management has changed. The delivery of healthcare is different than it was 20 years ago. And if anybody doesn't believe that, I would recommend they read a book that's entitled The Half-Life of Facts. And basically what it boils down to is the ability to access megatrends and megadata and put it into something that's understandable and then make use of it. And I think over the past 2 or 3 years, we've started seeing and profiting from that type of research in healthcare delivery. And our focus nowadays is not just providing services, but providing or enabling our patients to maintain their health and maintain their wellness. And if so necessary, to intervene to make the sick better. And that's what the focus of today's meeting is. I'm going to keep my remarks just at that point. Dr. Migliari is up next. And I'm introducing Dr. Migliari. I thought that the best thing to do is when you come up here, just tell them what you do for your organization, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks once again for including us on the podium, but most profoundly, thank you for the privilege and the honor of serving the people of our armed services. My name's Dick Migliori. I'm a transplant surgeon by background, but I have the privilege of serving as the Chief Medical Officer for United Health Group. And on behalf of United Health Group, I'm proud to be here today, along with Dr. Woodson, Dr. Deneen, and Dr. Littlefield, to both share our experiences and to learn more about the DoD's and VA's innovations in healthcare. United Health Group is pleased to be able to support the Reserve Officers Association Defense Education Forum and to participate with such an esteemed panel of experts on healthcare innovation. You know, as a surgeon, it's very clear that military medicine has been a rich source of innovation that has shaped and reshaped the way in which civilian surgery and medicine is practiced. For that, Society owes the DoD and the VA a profound debt of gratitude. But just like that, in terms of healthcare services, that is the organization and the operation of healthcare delivery, the DoD and the VA enjoy that same level of leadership. Through their early and continued commitment to electronic health records, their advanced use of telemedicine technologies, and their ongoing commitment to innovation in healthcare delivery, they have been able to achieve things in healthcare that civilian medicine has not been able to yet. We, United Health Group, want to bring civilian medicine along to operate with that level of discipline, organization, and clearly its effectiveness. As the largest healthcare company in the U.S., United Health Group is also committed to leveraging the latest technologies and to enhance the consumer experience, to improve access, to drive quality outcomes, and to keep costs sustainable, to reduce the burden that threatens the ongoing sustainability of healthcare delivery. We'd like to say that technology and innovation is part of our DNA. In fact, it is woven through the fabric of our culture, to the point that we will spend over $2.5 billion this year and every year on enhancing our technology and our capabilities. We have the ability to apply these technologies at tremendous scale, including in the service of some 85 million Americans, including, as Tina Jonas will share with you, the men and women of the armed services through the TRICARE contract. Using these types of technologies, we have the ability to change systems, putting our heads together with the Department of Defense and the VA. We have confidence that we can drive a healthcare product together that the nation has yet to see. We will continue to develop these tools and capabilities, and I do invite you to take a look in the lobby downstairs on your way out this afternoon to take a look at what some of those things are. We've shared them with Dr. Woodson and with other leaders of the Department of Defense, as well as with the VA. And we're glad to be able to show you this afternoon, and Craig Kurzweil will be on the panel and will share you with some of those capabilities. I am going to close by being very simple about this. United Health Group's core capabilities in clinical care, information technology, data analytics make us uniquely enable us to address the evolving needs of healthcare as they arise. We have 2 business platforms dedicated to serving people, those 85 million, the United Healthcare businesses, which provide benefits to 45 million people, as well as Optum, which is really dedicated to making the health system work better by engaging people who seek care and people who deliver care using those same types of technologies. United Health Group is constantly innovating to deliver new products and services that better serve the individuals through every stage of life, and by personalizing and simplifying consumers' health experiences, strengthening doctor and patient relationships, because that's where healthcare occurs, and then streamlining and modernizing care so that more money is spent on healthcare and less is spent on administration. Again, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today, to be part of this important discussion on how we can work better together, joining the private sector with the Department of Defense and the VA to modernize healthcare and to make the health system work better for everyone. Dr. Koselke.
The next presentation is by personally a good friend of mine, a longtime friend of mine. So for me, he needs no introduction, but Dr. John Woodson, who my first half of my tenure as the commanding general of the AR MedCom was my deputy commander. So I don't know if I should introduce you as doctor or brigadier general, but let's use doctor, Mr. Secretary. How's that? But we've known each other since about 1993, so we go back a long ways. Right? Thanks for coming. Great. You want to use? You have to use the mic 'cause it's a webinar. Okay.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here back in ROA, an organization that's near and dear to my heart for reasons that have already been mentioned. My history is really tied to, and probably my present position is really tied to my life in the reserve structure, which I cherish beyond all imagination. And we'll probably get into a little bit about that in a few minutes. Listen, these sessions don't go well unless we get good audience participation. So your job is, I'm going to throw some things out at you relative to advances in medicine, and then your job is to ask me hard questions at the end of the presentation. If for no other reason that this is hearing season, you know, and I'm running consistently back and forth across to those buildings across the street, and so I can use you as a murder board, you know, and see what kind of tough questions I'm going to get when I'm testifying. But at any rate, it's a great pleasure to be here among all old friends and colleagues. So thanks very much. If I could have the next slide, please. So, you know, the history of military medicine really is tied to the advances in medicine, and we could give you a long discourse and lecture actually on advances in medicine, which I routinely did when I was a professor. But, you know, it tracks back to, let's say, even the Civil War, when Letterman produced systems for clearing the battlefield and establishing medical records. World War I, where we started studying shock and blood transfusions and fielding labs. In World War II, the advancement in the use of antibiotics, sulfur and penicillin, first dialysis use, to the Korean conflict, in which we actually saw some disruptive technology come in, the helicopter, which changed the dynamics of clearing the battlefield, allowed for more stable patients to get to definitive care centers with wounds that were not infected, and then allowed us to do novel things that we had heretofore not been able to do, such as repair blood vessels. So I owe my specialty to the issue of advances in war, technological advances in war that were not tied exactly to medicine originally, but in fact allowed new disciplines in medicine to flourish. In Vietnam, of course, we expanded that ability to evacuate the battlefield effectively, but advanced far-forward surgery, burn surgery. The medics from the battlefield came home with superb experience and training, as they are now, and became the basis of our emergency medical systems and helicopter transport in the civilian world. Radically changed the way we look at civilian emergency services and advanced that strategy and saved many lives. And then it goes on and on. So the advances in military medicine have been tied to the advances in medicine writ large have been tied to military medicine. If I can have the next slide, please. I throw this slide up. I'm a surgeon, and there are a couple of surgeons in the audience, you know, and it's been reported that Hippocrates in about 400 BC made this quote, which is, "He who wishes to be a surgeon should go to war." Now, what he was really talking about is the issue that, you know, surgeon was a generic term, but if war is really the dark side of humanity, then medicine is about the hope and the light, that in war, casualties are generated. It's a laboratory, in some sense, for advancing strategies for care and the treatment of the ill and injured. Individuals could gain great experience. Now, if my wife were here, she would say that I took this too literally, because we have spent a substantial amount of time away from home in theaters of operation, doing what I consider really meaningful work. But it has advanced my own skill and my own outlook on advances in medicine. If I could have the next slide, please. This slide has a couple of messages in it. We've talked about some of the advances that have occurred in other wartime eras. But this picture here shows how really, in military medicine, we actually push the envelope in many different ways. The picture shows Sergeant Morocco sitting there with Lieutenant General Horoho. Sergeant Morocco is the recipient of the first double-arm transplant. And talking about trying to create new abilities and restore hope, this is what it's all about. We'll talk a little bit about the amputee experience and what kinds of advances have been made and what kinds of challenges still remain. But also there's a social message in this. You know, Lieutenant General Horoho is the first nurse to be named Surgeon General, and so we push the envelope also in terms of the social aspects and making sure that we use all of our intellect to the fullest. If I could have the next slide, please. Of course, as noted, military medicine and the advances that are made diffuse their way into society, and this was a campaign by the Orthopedics Association about a year ago. And the text here is really appropriate in the sense that it talks about a young woman who nearly lost her leg in an accident, but that the information technology and advances in limb salvage really resulted in the salvage of that leg. So we see the diffusion already. If I could have the next slide. And it goes on, so that most recently this year with the Boston bombing, we have been in consultation with the docs and the trauma systems up there and the rehabilitation systems to transfer some of our ideas about how to care for these individuals longitudinally, not only the surgical care, but longitudinally in terms of rehabilitation goals. And that's an ongoing effort and a set of consultation, so it diffuses. Next slide, please. So, you know, we've been at war now for 13 plus years, longest war in the history of this country. And there have got to be some lessons that have been learned. We have over 50,000 wounded, and we've developed new strategies for not only in-theater care, but evacuation. And this lesson continues. It's unfortunate, but the world remains an extraordinarily dangerous place. And so it's not likely that these lessons will be lost very soon, but more importantly, it sharpens our focus on continuing to advance because we don't know the next set of events that we'll be called into. If I could have the next slide, please. This slide really indicates the extent to which we've sort of transformed military medicine to become a more agile, adaptive, and learning organization. This slide demonstrates the rise in what's called injury severity scores, and what that really means is that we're seeing sicker, more severely injured individuals who are surviving and getting into the system for care. The bottom graph shows the decline in the case fatality rates, which is a marker of those that die of their wounds. And what you see is the fact that although individuals are sicker and more severely injured, the case fatality rate has gone down. And so this is a testament to a learning organization with the joint trauma system that was in place. We were able to mine the data in terms of the care of the casualties and then rapidly turn this over into improvements in the strategy for care and help design a system that was really end-to-end. So it's all about the issue of what happens at the point of injury and the sophistication you bring to that encounter with better training of medics, helicopters that now fly, paramedics and critical care nurses in that sort of tactical evacuation model, to level 2 and level 3 facilities that have more robust capabilities, but more importantly do the right thing, meaning damage control surgery without trying to do advanced procedures that are beyond the scope and then lead to poorer outcomes. Then it continues on through an air strategic evacuation chain and improvements, where we have now, of course, flying ICUs that take care of extraordinarily sick and injured individuals at 37,000 feet, take into account all of the issues relative to altitude and the like, get them to a level 4 and 5 facility where they have really advanced care. Next slide. And so the need for continuous innovation is part of our strategy. If I have the next slide, this slide really just represents sort of the constellation of issues that we now are dealing with as we are saving more individuals on the battlefield. Right now, we can talk about the lowest, as I said, died of wound rates in the history of recorded warfare. But the flip side of that is that the rehabilitation challenges are even greater. It goes much beyond just the issue of healing the wounds. We have the constellation of brain injuries, amputation, soft tissue injuries, spinal cord injuries, pain management issues, and then sensory loss that affects the rehabilitation process. So with these IEDs that have been the signature offending agent in the wars, not only do you have the obvious injuries, but you have eye injuries and vestibular injuries, ear injuries that complicate if you're trying to teach someone to walk again, particularly on a prosthetic. And we need to integrate all of these concerns and create rehabilitation programs that take into account the constellation of issues that we need to deal with. If I have the next slide, please. And there are even second and third order effects, the sleep disorder. If you don't have correct algorithms for dealing with management of pain, you lead to substance abuse, the psychiatric or behavioral health issues that fall out. So someone is physically injured, but they are also psychologically injured by these severe episodes of trauma. And as I mentioned before, hearing and cognitive issues. If I could have the next slide, please. We also have been challenged by the fact that we have seen, as a result of better ability to resuscitate and save lives, multiple amputations that create challenges for rehabilitation or reintegration into civilian life. Next slide, please. And of course, the issue is that, as is true in war, younger people are more often affected, so that it's not an issue about the here and now, but it's an issue about the decades of life that they have left, and what kinds of things do we need to be thinking about now so that they have the quality of life later on. And just to give you an example of what we're talking about, that if we've got some data from the Vietnam era veterans, that if an individual has an amputation, and remember it takes about 40 to 60% more energy to walk with a prosthetic than it does with your own limb, and in fact they smoke and they become sedentary, if they gain weight, then they wind up with 2/3 more diabetes and 3/4 more cardiovascular disease, which degrades the quality of their life in the decades to come, and actually cuts down on the number of years of life in the decades to come. So we have to have a comprehensive approach to keeping them healthy. If I could have the next slide, please. So we have all sorts of implication that we need to be addressing, implications for activities of daily living, issues about how prosthetics and rehabilitation strategies affect other limbs and create other problems, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. If I could have the next slide. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we know is that there's an issue that if someone has an amputation, that the contralateral limb is affected, that there's a high degree of arthritis because of the way the gait people walk. It puts stresses on other joints. And we need to take this into account as we develop advanced bioprosthesis to offload the stresses that are on the contralateral limb. So in fact, you don't have impaired mobility relative to that limb in later decades. If I could have the next slide. And of course, we have to integrate the issues of the psychological injury in terms of the motivation and the rehabilitation plan. And as I mentioned, the development of cardiovascular disease. Next slide, please. But what I want to do is leave you with clearly an impression that there really is hope and progress, even as there is more work to be done. Next slide, please. What have we learned from 12 years of war? Well, first of all, we know that there's a new type of wounded warrior. In the era of the all-volunteer force, the wounded warrior sees themselves as a professional service member, professional warrior. And they're not so ready to divest themselves of that identity. And so many of them wish to be retained in service, and right now this says about 20% remain on active duty. It's more like 24 or 25%. A number have returned to the combat zone, as indicated in this picture here, and we need to understand that we've got to customize the rehabilitation strategy to the wishes and desires of the individual. And our mantra really is to create ability, not to define disability. Right now we have individuals who are in active duty that have spinal cord injuries, that have sight impairment, that have double amputation. Some of those folks have been in command positions and are uniquely suited to command wounded warrior battalions. Because it's about their cognitive ability and their leadership and their ability to role model that is so important in those positions. If I could have the next slide, please. And this gives you an example of folks that have returned to duty. In the far left part of the slide is an individual with an amputation who went back to the combat zone. The middle slide is an amputee that actually flew the vice president's plane. And then the other slide shows you the extent to which these individuals really consider themselves warrior athletes. And we need to appreciate that and understand that. Next slide, please. What have we also learned from 12 years of war? That even those who separate medically from the service look to have an exceptionally active retired status, involved in all sorts of sports, and so we have this military adaptive sports program that actually looks at training them really as athletes, basically. So that they can engage in those activities that they have been used to, whether it's hunting, whether it's running, whether or not it's biking. Next slide, please. And that we, in fact, have been able to transfer some of this motivation to the civilian sector. This actually shows two individuals. The individual on the right of the picture is a victim of the Boston bombing, and the individual who's standing up is a wounded warrior. And the individuals from the Boston bombing actually came down to one of our rehabilitation centers to see how the process how it goes for the military folks, but also just to give them encouragement about the extent to which they can re-engage in active lives. If I could have the next slide, please. We are using advanced technology to analyze individuals to, again, develop these individualized rehabilitation programs. So specific prosthetic fit, prosthetic use, gait issues, as I mentioned before, to prevent problems occurring down the road. And this is extraordinarily important in multiple limb loss. If I could have the next slide, please. We continue to improve the technology of the prosthetics so that they're powered, they're easier to walk with, they offload the stresses on other parts of the body. Next slide, please. And we have come to understand some short and long-term outcomes that with these prosthetics, of course, there's earlier mobility and independence, which of course is not only vocationally but psychologically satisfying. We can reduce the falls and the secondary complications. We can reduce the pain medicines and the substance abuse issues that follow from that. Psychologically, as I mentioned, it's a boost, it's a motivation. The long-term outcome, of course, requires more study, more vigilance in terms of what they'll need in decades ahead. If I could have the next slide, please. But the technology does make a difference. If you talk about good prosthetics and what it does for the entire family unit, this is clearly an example about a father who's now active. He's not he doesn't need to be supported as much by other family members in caregiver roles, but he's independent, active, and fully engaged with his family. If I could have the next slide, please. Maybe we can run this video and show the difference that some of these prosthetics make. So this shows traditional limb and the difficulty, and you can see the stresses on the other side. This is now one of the power limbs, which gives them more natural gait and offloads the stresses on the contralateral limb. If I could have the next slide, please. We've developed a number of assistive and other adaptive technology to help with those who cannot rehabilitate with artificial limbs. And this is important for, again, allowing them to engage in a full range of activities in normal life and be independent and work. Next slide, please. Our next generation is going to look at implantable technology in which you have better ability to command the prosthetic, and this is really important for upper extremity prosthetics, which heretofore has been very cumbersome to use, and in fact many people abandon their upper extremity prosthetic because it doesn't feel natural. You don't have the sensation, you don't have the command ability and the sensitivity, but with the new implantable technology a lot of that is taken away. If I could have the next slide, please. And roll this video just to give you an example of what we're talking about.
I was on a deployment in Afghanistan, and on July 15th, 2012, while I was interrogating an ID, it detonated in my face, resulting in the loss of my right arm, and I'm blind in my left eye. With my original Myo, it was very limited in what I can do. With my new setup, with 8 sensors implanted inside, now I have 3 ranges of motion. I can open and close, I can rotate my wrist, and now I can move my thumb independently. And the plus side is I can do everything all at once now. And the other one, I cannot do that. It's just open up a whole other world of doing tasks like I used to be able to. Not having to stop to put something down, change my thumb position, re-grabbing that object. I can drop my bag of groceries, open my thumb, grab out my wallet, get my ATM card or my key card from my room, put it back, and then go grab the groceries from the ground without using my left hand because I can now move my thumb.
Close your hand and rotate it out, and then open it and rotate it in. This research study is extremely exciting because it's the first person in the world to ever get implanted electronic sensors. The way upper limb prosthetics work today is that we really rely on sensors that are placed on the surface of the skin to pick up muscle activity to control a robotic arm. The problem that has is sometimes those skin contacts are not providing high fidelity signals and can be oftentimes disrupted when an individual, let's say, sweats. One of the limitations with using our robotic arms today is that you can only typically control 1 degree of freedom at a time. And so what we found is if we could put an electrode into an individual directly into the muscles that are programmed to provide that activity, it would provide much more intuitive use of the prosthesis.
Great. I think we can go on to the next slide now. You get the idea. It's light years ahead of what we had and gives much more functionality. This slide just shows you, again, the range of activities that folks are in through the rehabilitation program. The gentleman there with the cowboy hat on, you may recognize. Actually, he was in that movie Battleship. He was a double amputee that was walking up that hill. That's Colonel Gadsden, who is just about to retire this summer, I think, after a full career, but was a Wounded Warrior Battalion commander and returned to active duty as a double amputee. But if I could have the next slide, please. We've, of course, keep going. You can build that slide. We've made some simple medical advances. So this issue of the combat application tourniquet has been an amazing lifesaver. It's a tourniquet that can be put on by the individual or the buddy. And of course, hemorrhage is one of the main causes of preventable deaths on the battlefield, and this has added significantly to the survival. If I could have the next slide. And this just shows the fact that they arrive with less shock and therefore are more easily resuscitated. Next slide, please. We are engaged through the Armed Forces Institute of Regenerative Medicine with a number of partners in learning how to regrow muscle, rebuild skin. Next slide, please. Effective treatments for burn that reduce scarring and provide effective coverage. Next slide, please. And of course, really bold moves that look at how do we produce better cosmetic results with face transplants and the like. So next slide, please. What we clearly are trying to do is look at the rehabilitation of individuals in a holistic manner. It's about rebuilding their bodies, but rebuilding their minds, their spirits, and also making them economically whole, and then rebuilding family units as well. Next slide, please. So our future really looks at ongoing innovation across the federal space, investment in strategic partners, and it requires a sustained focus going forward. And next slide, please. We have had some immediate success. We need to be persistent in order to understand what contributes to long-term success and what the requirements will be for veterans going forward. Now, as I end, I've painted a picture of sort of technological advances, but the issue really is that we've also needed innovation in our system of care. I talked about the issue about with the Joint Theater Trauma System, how we've collected data and mined that data and produced improvements. And we have to bring that new strategy to what we do to all aspects of military medicine. It's about a data-driven, high-learning system that constantly improves and innovates. And several months ago, I articulated 6 lines of effort to move the military health system ahead to be better, stronger, and more relevant for the future. One was to modernize management with an enterprise focus, and Lieutenant General Doug Robb is here with me as the first director of the Defense Health Agency, which really has made great advances in trying to drive common business processes and common clinical processes across all of military medicine, and it's yielding significant savings even as we speak. One of the things we needed to be cautious of is the fact that as we drive out variation, driving out variation based upon evidence-based data, not just driving out variation for driving out variation's sake. At the same time, we needed to balance that against the ability to create innovation. And so we've stood up an innovation cell. Part of the responsibility of that group is to invest and develop our strategy for knowledge management. And of course, one of the issues we have to deal with is there's a lot of information out there, but how do you convert that into usable knowledge at the point of service particularly, and then create wisdom in the system, which is when everybody works utilizing all of the best evidence and we create the highest standards. We're going to leverage technology, and so we're investing heavily in defining those new capabilities, such as telehealth across the entire spectrum, from teleconsultation, telebehavioral health, to tele-ICU, to teleradiology. We have a far-flung empire that is worldwide distributed, and we can't put subspecialists at every camp, post, and station in every part of the world. But we can link our practitioners with that sophisticated, advanced knowledge technologically, and so we're moving out. And then there are all other sorts of changes in the way we do business, such as a common cost accounting system and the like, and a strategy that focuses on market management rather than individual service management of beneficiaries. We talked about, and it's in the chairman's actual guidance, about defining the 21st century integrated joint medical capabilities. We've looked at how we need to modernize, what sort of infrastructure we need, what kind of people do we need. We're looking at the issue of, which should be important to this audience, the ACRC balance. So as we look at the sort of the manpower issues and the capabilities issues, where should they reside so that we can be most effective, most efficient, but also what kinds of policies do we need to reform so that we can tap into that very important resource. We are working to identify and invest in our strategic partners, as noted before, whether this is professional organizations, academic institutions, community-based institutions, so that we can do our job better and more efficient. And by the way, it's really important to do this because as the military shrinks, and we're now less than 1% of, representing the American public, we need to keep that connection with the American public. It's bad in a democracy when the public is divorced from the military and the military institutions and don't understand that. We've discussed also defining what should be our global health engagement requirements, as this is now seen as a new instrument of national power. And then the last is to produce a benefit reform that is modern, that is flexible, that really gives the beneficiary what they desire and what they need going forward. And by the way, is more cost effective and efficient in the administration. So with that, I'm going to stop and let you ask me any hard questions you might have. But I want you to understand that we're considering innovation across the entire spectrum of activities that we do.
Thank you. My name is Tom Sparkman. I'm here on behalf of the American Clinical Laboratory Association. In addition to being a pharmacist, my girlfriend's also a Navy reservist. So these are all very important issues to me. Over a year ago, TRICARE stopped covering molecular pathology tests specifically for beneficiaries in the community network. And this decision literally set TRICARE years behind laboratory medicine.
So let me cut to the chase on that one, because good. We understand the problem. We're going to fix it. We
Can you tell us when?
We understand that it was an interpretation. Actually, it was an accurate interpretation. It didn't quite take in the broader view, but an accurate interpretation of the limitations on the CFR. But we recognize that there are evolving technologies that don't fit the clearly defined FDA-approved, and we will pay for those tests. And so we have a strategy to take care of that. So that is, you'll see that come out in probably just a couple of weeks or so. Okay? All right. Very good.
Good afternoon, sir. John Casillas, ROA, Department of Illinois. We're fortunate in Illinois. We have a regional medical facility, the James Lovell Center, which is a joint VA-DoD facility. One of the issues that we're dealing with right now is we have another organization that would like to contribute to the effort, just as you laid out in the last part of your briefing, sir. The counties all have a Veterans Assistance Commission, and those Veterans Assistance Commissions handle maybe 2,000 claims a year. They would like to participate with those kinds of facilities, but they're not allowed to enter or have space in those locations. Is there a plan to include some of these tax-funded organizations that would like to help out?
So I don't know if I can specifically answer what you're talking to, except to say that we are looking at the full spectrum of partnerships and the added value of these partnerships. And so community-based organizations and other organizations that clearly add value and strength to what we do, we're going to be looking at in terms of associations long-term. I mean, it's very clear that, military folks and vets return to communities, and we've got to bring the communities into the fold. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Mr. Secretary, Gordon Austin,
thank you, first of all, for just an amazing program and a very hopeful program. And it really brought me back to thinking of over almost 40 years of my experience in military medicine. And going back to one of your early slides, the paradox of the severity of the injury and the improving survivals, how that has spread. Again, years ago, when we were talking about triage and the utilization of military resources, that the goal of the medical department was not necessarily to save lives, but it was return the fighting unit to the field. And the goal of the enemy was not necessarily to kill you, but to injure you to take up your resources. This program really goes across that broad spectrum of that paradox in seeing how we are returning people to the field, and yet we still have to deal with that huge cost of taking care of those severely injured people, not the ones that go back to the service, but those that are not going to go back to service. So again, thank you again for a very thought-provoking presentation.
Well, thank you for those comments. And I think one of the things I should point out, and implied in your statement, is that we're operating in a different world in the 21st century. The American public, American leaders, the families expect of the military medical system not just to deliver just-in-time care that is decremented because it's in an austere environment. They expect us to deliver advanced care in the austere environment and save every life possible, and then, as I mentioned before, rehabilitate those individuals in all dimensions, mind, body, spirit, and economically. That's a different way of thinking, and probably the issues of 2007 at Walter Reed was that wake-up call where, in fact, the medical care was good, but we hadn't really dealt with the other dimensions of the care that needed to go on for the warrior and the family. And I think we fully understand that now, and so we can't sit on our laurels. That's the issue. Other questions? Yes.
Thanks. Sir, thank you for being here. Second Lieutenant John McElligott, reservist, Norway member at Fort Meade, and my day job is to represent public health service officers, one of the 7 uniformed services. So everything you've talked about today deals with care on the battlefield or after. The other way that we can reduce costs is by preventing things from happening. So I think this may be tied to your innovation for the future and partnering with HHS. How do you foresee preventing obesity, overweight, other issues that are tied to general population issues, and then whether we can get soldiers and Marines and airmen to serve, and preventing injury before they go on the battlefield?
So great question, and unfortunately in these kind of talks you don't have time to put everything out on the floor, but thanks for asking that question, because now I can talk about that. The issue is that we clearly understand our need to invest in prevention. We are subscribers to the National Prevention Strategy. We have defined our process by moving from healthcare to health. Healthcare is about what you do after someone is broken. Sort of health is about all of those preventative things that, in all the dimensions you can think about, that keep people healthy. You're going to see pretty soon us coming out with some pretty strong recommendations about issues relative to smoking, which we don't have as good as statistics on in the military service. We have a number of issues relative to obesity. We've developed this Healthy Base Initiative, which is this holistic look at our installations, doing nutritional food assessments and venues, everything from vending machines to looking at the environments where you have bikes and walking paths, to time in the day when you can actually exercise, to a host of other issues relative to creating a healthy environment and making the healthy choice the easy choice. So we are taking that on, and we consider that a very serious part of our strategy going forward. Yes.
We have time for one more question. Okay. Dr. Woodson has to move out to another event.
Yeah, I got
Great.
time for 2 more questions.
Okay.
Maybe 3
All
more.
right. Hi, my name is Maynard Fries. I'm with Easter Seals. We're a community-based organization across the country providing services and supports for veterans and other folks. really like to focus on community partnerships and the role of communities. What role do you see care coordination playing in that and helping veterans, military personnel to navigate the myriad of services, both governmental services and non-governmental services? And does DoD have a plan to help flush that out across the country?
Yeah, no, good question again. And this whole issue of care coordination is, again, an evolving story. I mean, so, 10 years ago or 5 years ago, we thought about care coordination as simply getting the patient to the right appointments, and then, again, we recognize that that is just not enough, and it's about a whole set of issues of coordinating issues for the family and job sort of skills, and now we understand the need about moving into communities. And remember, again, veterans are in a lot of diverse communities with differing resources, basically. One of the issues that we're dealing with is sort of the plethora of all sorts of support activities that could be out there. And all sorts of programs, not all of which have metrics that define that they are useful. And so we're iteratively sorting through the enormous number of programs, trying to synchronize the whole idea of information where, in other words, giving the wounded warrior a place to go where they can identify programs that might be in their area that might be useful, and then being able to track these programs and outcomes. So it's an enormous task, and all I can say at this point is that we are committed to iteratively going through these programs to rack and stack and provide them in a fashion that veterans and wounded warriors can use, and then link that to their care so that there's a seamless kind of transfer. A job that's not done yet, clearly, but we're working on it. Yes.
Hi, I'm Dr. Ellen Johnson. I'll actually be an active duty psychiatrist for the Air Force in a few months. So how do you see the MHS kind of innovating in the area of psychiatric illness, similarly to how it has for orthopedics?
So that's a good question, and we can answer that by saying that we really need to innovate in several dimensions. One of the things I think we need to acknowledge up front is how little we really know about neuroscience and neurobehavioral issues. That this is really a field that is ripe for further investigation. And so the short answer is we're investing heavily in research projects collaboratively with the Veterans Administration to define better care strategies for folks with neurocognitive issues and neuropsychiatric issues. But more importantly, we need to do some more of that basic research to define how to intervene when you've got problems. At a very basic level, all of us sitting here are having thoughts and emotions and, doing things. At a very basic level, there's a biochemical reaction going on. And so at a cellular level, we got to understand what's going on and then broaden that to strategies for treatment and then bring in, again, all of these other issues that relate to support services and the like. That may not be the answer you want, but it really is the accurate state of play that we don't have a lot of hard science that drives a lot of what we do with behavioral health, and we need to just do more investigation as rapidly as possible to find those answers. Okay, got the hook here. So thank you very much for your attention this afternoon.
John, I think I could speak for the rest of the crowd here that we appreciate your giving up time from the hearing season, as you call it, and a busy day to spend some time with us, giving us your views, your observations, and your thoughts ahead from your catbird seat. And on behalf of the ROA,
thank you very much.
Thanks.
Great.
Say hello to the family.
Everyone have a great afternoon.
Okay, if everybody wants to take a stretch break, now's the time, and we'll get our panel up here. Yeah.
Is to the right.
I want to hang you out. Right. No, I got you. Yeah, thanks.
John Cletus says,
Okay, thank you.
he's doing a great job. He's our command surgeon for the tech.
Very good. Thank you.
Sir, how are you? Oh, yes, I do.
Do you see him around? Mike, did he go? Oh, okay, because I know he was sitting up front. Yeah.
Okay, all presenters can click right here. I think,
Okay, if we're going to finish at 3 o'clock, have people start moving back to their seats, please. Oh, let's see, who we got here first? Is it still here? He'll be first. We'll just go down. Hi, you Mike Deneen?
Mike Deneen, yes.
Oh, hi, Bob Kasoki. How are you? Right over here.
Oh, thank you.
Oh. What we'll do is right down the road, 10 minutes apiece, and that'll be the order. And then till whatever time they finish, we'll go till 3 o'clock, and then with Q&A, and that'll be that. Yeah. Do you have any slides or not?
Yes, I do. And can I get the clicker? Is that all right if I get the clicker? Thank you so much.
Yep. It's too easy. Sitting down is fine. Yeah. Unless you feel uncomfortable doing it sitting down. We're pretty informal with this stuff. So as people wend their way back to their seats, we'll start in about a minute here with our panel presentations. And on the panel, we have Dr. Michael Deneen, who's the Director and the Officer of Safety Management, Military Health System, Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs. We have Dr. Patrick Littlefield, who's the Consultant in the Office of the Veterans Affairs, and Mr. Craig Kurzweil, who's Senior Vice President, Analytic Innovations, United Health Group. You've got the clicker. So here's the rules of engagement. We'll allow each presenter to have 10 minutes to present. So 10 times 3, my math is 30 minutes, and then what's left over between then and 3 o'clock will be for Q&A. Okay? The ayes have it. All right, you're on.
Good afternoon. Is this working now? Oh, is it working now? Yes. Great. My name is Mike Deneen, and what I'd like to do is share with you a concept brief today that's talking about one of the sort of the essence of part of our strategy. I think we heard a masterful description of the majority of our strategy in terms of readiness and restoring wounded warriors back to health. But I'd like to talk about another issue, and that's healthcare to health, and do it in the context of a metaphor, and that metaphor being and my apologies to those who are not football fans, but my metaphor being football. Whoops. Oh, do you? Yeah, it's not working. Okay, okay. Can you do it? Can you do it for me? Oh,
Is it on?
oh, is it on? Now it works? Great. So the first question we'd ask is what does it mean to win at health? And our answer briefly is that it's not about living or dying. It's actually about thriving versus suffering. And so the question is, how do you live a life that's a life where you thrive and that you don't suffer? A football team has 3 squads, an offense, a defense, and then special teams for those special circumstances where you can have big gains particularly. So what squad are we fielding now as the United States of America, as well as military health system? When we asked many, many people, their sense was that what we're fielding now is a defensive squad, that we wait for people to get ill rather than actively promoting their health over time. So if that's the case, then we'd sort of look at this issue of, well, what does it mean to have a defense? And we have a defensive line. The first defense against the other team, coming against us, would be primary care, also dental, urgent care, emergency rooms, pharmacies. If somebody gets through that and illness proceeds, then they get to our linebackers, the specialty care, inpatient care. And then finally, if illness progresses to the point that it's maybe multi-organ or very serious, we have subspecialty care, intensive care, case management. One of our concerns is we've overinvested in, if you will, the defensive ends and the safeties, and that now we in the military health system are investing more heavily in primary care, and I think you'll see that across the country. On the other side, what are those things that are coming against us on the offense? Well, there's the traditional stuff of acute illness, minor injuries, unhealthy lifestyles, but particularly unhealthy lifestyles. And are we really addressing those things with the defensive squad we have on the field? But then when you get beyond, what are the big gains from the enemy, if you will, on the playing field of health? Well, it's chronic illness and major trauma. And right now, those are our major things that we're working with that drive probably 75 to 80% of our costs. And right now, the question is, do we really have an effective defense against chronic illness and major trauma? And then really, for the long gains, if you will, towards suffering, we're looking at complex illness and chronic multiple illnesses. And for many of our wounded warriors, this is where they live. And are we developing the defenses against those? I'd say we're doing pretty well against the big stuff. But against the initial things like acute illness, minor illnesses, and particularly unhealthy lifestyles, we're not as effective as we could be. And then, what side is the patient on? Is the patient actually trying to promote health, or are they playing for the offense? So do we have people that are actually trying to stay healthy, or do we have people in our communities and in the way that we've set up our communities that are actually promoting ill health? And I think that's a valid question to be asking. So just as an example, let's talk about what happens and how this all works in practice. So what you have is you have a person who goes in motion and they're pre-diabetic, if you will. And then over time, they gain some weight. And then they get high blood pressure and high blood sugar, and now they're diagnosed with diabetes. And now you go on and you develop concurrent illnesses along with your diabetes, like high blood pressure and kidney failure and heart failure. And then you get the touchdown, which is tragic, actually. And that's the person with the diabetic with amputation who's on dialysis, who's in chronic pain, and has no sight, and is living in a nursing home. And too often this actually happens. And it could be prevented, but it could be prevented for a guy like me. So a year ago, I was 35 pounds heavier. And I got good advice from a doctor who said, you're losing potentially 10 to 15 years of your life. And by the way, I gained those 25 or 30 pounds when I retired from the Navy. When I was in the Navy and I had to do a PRT every 6 months, I stayed in pretty good shape. But I got out and I got in this job, which is relatively stressful. I was drinking more, I was eating inappropriately, and I wasn't active as I needed to be. Over the last year, I've tried to get a little bit better about defending against those things that would have caused me to go down this path. So the next question is, who puts all this together? Who's the defensive coordinator? is this role even defined in healthcare today? Do we have someone who looks across primary care, specialty care, all the way into the highest level of multi-specialty care? And the answer is not so much, but that's what we're trying to build in our integrated delivery system right now. We're trying to get the parts of our system integrated, so we have basically a defensive coordinator so that we watch the progression of illness and reverse it at the earliest possible level. Without the defensive coordinator, though, fumbling the ball is only to be expected. And in terms of our system, the kinds of things we talk about in terms of fumbling are ineffective care transitions, loss of specialist coordination, lost lab results, and repeated studies. And when people talk about waste in healthcare, this is a big piece of it. And again, we believe that having an integrated delivery system with integrated knowledge and information, we can start to really address these issues which are driving up costs truly in a wasteful way. So these things are not contributing to health or in any measurable way. They're actually contributing to the increase in cost. And by addressing these things through integration, we believe we can actually achieve our goal, which is perfect quality at zero cost. So now let's go and think about the offensive unit. So if you think about that, who should we have on that team? That's the team that promotes health. And how do we know we are winning? And who plays at the different positions? So going into the same sort of chart, what are we defending against with that team? We'd be defending against things like poor diet, lack of exercise, smoking, and use of alcohol and drugs. We'd be worrying about the bigger things that cause major suffering in a person's life: accidents, crime and violence, toxic exposure. And the giant things, the public health issues, epidemics, natural disasters, and war. So what kind of a team do you need to field to go up against that, to defend against that, and to go on the offensive? So we'd suggest at the front line, it's really empowering parents, teachers, health coaches, and primary care. It's not actually mostly about primary care. It's about health literacy among those who are at the front line, who are educating our children. But then the next stage, and I think we should have included, in that first section, employers. But as you go forward, who else has got to be on that team? Well, it's epidemiologists to let us know what the biggest risks are. It's employers to design the workplace so that it fosters health and promotes health. It's public health workers to be able to work at the community level to get communities to be redesigned to focus on health. And it's architects to design our built structure so that it fosters health. The last building we were in before the Defense Health Agency, we couldn't actually walk up and down steps in the building because of security issues. And so we have to think about everything in terms of its health implications and getting us to be more active and to eat the right kinds of foods and avoid other unhealthy behaviors. And then those of us in this room, policymakers, city planners, people who do disaster planning, so that we can avoid those major causes of suffering over time, and even our politicians who can keep us out of war, hopefully. But again, we ask the question, what side's the patient on? Well, I'd like to say that in my case, I feel like I've been the quarterback. I mean, I said to myself, I had advice from all those around me. I had coaching, but I had to be the one that called the shots in terms of changing my lifestyle so that I could lose the weight, so that I could act in a more healthy way, so that I could prolong my own life. Are we really empowering people now to be the architect of their own healthy future? And then the next question is, do we have those coaches? Do we have people that are out there coaching people to better health? And the question is, could we create a new title, a new job title called Health Coordinator, or Health Or, as some people have talked about in the HHS, that brings together schools, community leaders, employers, and public health to actually address the issues? Dr. Woodson talked about the Healthy Base Initiative. That's where we're actually trying to do that. We're bringing together all those entities within the Department of Defense to coordinate in support of health. It's really a landmark kind of approach that says we've got to design around getting people to live longer and healthier to help them thrive and avoid suffering. So finally, this slide is about kind of the difference in the current state from the future state. So in our system, when I went through medical school, I never had anything where I had to work in a team until I graduated from medical school. And then the minute I graduated from medical school, it was all about teams. But we don't have a mechanism to actually teach our doctors to be heads of teams. I think the military has a dramatic advantage over civilian healthcare in that from the beginning we're taught to be in teams and that we rely on teams for our own survival. In civilian healthcare, that's a huge change because for so long doctors were sort of above everybody else. In the military, doctors are members of the team. And we're trying to figure out interesting ways in our education system, in the university, down in San Antonio in the Medical Education and Training Center, to train as teams so we can perform as teams. And the final thing I'd say, are there implications for training? So you see how we do doctors, as I just said, by yourself. But you know, football doesn't train that way. You train in teams. So the question is, as we evolve in healthcare, can we evolve the way team sports that really try to win games train as well as play? And the final thing I'd say is just that if you have a chance, General Electric, so it's not just us thinking this, if you have a chance to go to this website, it's pretty cool. They have sort of a 30-second shot just to kind of give you some sense of, hey, let's all get together and do this thing. So that's I think it's a risk that it's not data-driven what I'm saying, but it's a concept that we're working on to try to help give a little bit of meaning to this concept of ours of healthcare to health. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, moving right down the line here, our next presenter is Dr. Patrick Littlefield, who is a consultant, Office of the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. You are on, sir.
So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm actually the acting director of the Center for Innovation at VA, so that was a part of the paperwork. We'll straighten that out later. Oh, okay. I did not bring slides, so I'm going to make a few remarks, just one-on-one. First of all, Secretary Shinseki has made a very public commitment to transform VA into a people-centric, results-oriented, and forward-looking organization. At the center of that commitment is the notion that what we need most of all to do is to empower veterans to improve their well-being. Can everybody hear me? Okay, thanks. And I want to pause, just take just a minute on those terms, well-being. And I think we've heard that throughout today, that language includes both physical health, mental health, and for us as well, economic health. So it's really about the overall well-being of the veteran. And I'm going to come back and touch on that in a moment. Now, within that, to emphasize how important that is, the Health Administration, which is the portion of our organization focused on health, has reframed their mission statement to honor Americans' veterans by providing exceptional health care that improves their health and well-being. Clearly, we have good command and control and commander's intent here, and the emphasis on well-being. So let's talk about what does that mean. Well, within the VHA, that we have three primary goals. They're to provide veterans with personalized, proactive, and patient-driven care, to achieve measurable improvements in health outcomes, and to ensure that we align our resources to deliver sustained value to veterans. So within the context of that, we're operating across a wide continuum of activity. On one end of it, we're very technology-centric. We're focusing on technologies that enable connectedness. We're focusing on data. How do we capture it? How do we contain it? How do we make sure that it's enriched? And ultimately, how do we derive value from it, both in the healthcare arena and more broadly? On the other end of the spectrum, we're doing some very, very kind of, I would say, basic work at the heart of the healthcare system, and that has to do with the patient and the physician, or as I like to say, the provider and the person receiving the care, about the relationship between those two individuals. This is a term that's often talked about, patient engagement. It's a concept that's been referred to as the blockbuster drug of the 21st century for its power to improve outcomes and reduce costs. But it really has to do with what happens between two individuals one-on-one, largely in a clinical setting, and I'm going to come back to that as well. Within the VA, the Center for Innovation, we function as a kind of combination of what I think of as pioneers and early settlers. We try to get out kind of ahead of the lines, find the places where they're of value, try them out, and then where they're effective and deliver value, then we want to feed them back into the organization so that they can be used more broadly. Now, I'm going to come back to my theme. On the one hand, technology, and on the other hand, kind of soft human skills on the other side. On the technology side, we're exploring a wide variety of things. To give you a couple of examples, we're working with a company that does a combination of sensor kind of data capture on the patient, so we get biometrics from the patient, which gets fed back to an analytics server, and then in this case we're looking at cardiovascular health. And on the server, we develop essentially a statistical control model for that individual based on their anatomy and their physiology. And the notion is that we can begin to see if their cardiac system starts to go out of control and therefore anticipate a cardiac event before the patient experiences it and lands in the hospital. So there are multiple pieces here. On the one end, the quality of the sensors. Are we getting the right data? The next layer, you've got this analytics engine, which says, can we parse this and actually convert it to meaningful information to put in the hands of the physician? And then secondly, how do we ensure that this can actually be introduced into the day-to-day practice of clinical care so that the physician can see it, respond to it, knows how to work with the patient, so on and so forth. So I think that touches on multiple elements of what we're doing there. Another area that we think is very interesting is in teleaudiology. Audiology issues are really common kind of for those who've had combat experience and in the military in general. And so at a very simple level, we're trying out technologies that would allow us to do a remote tune-up of a hearing aid. So instead of the veteran having to drive into the medical center or the CBOC and spend a lot of time and money to get that done, we can do that over the phone and in the person's home. So this is prospective. I want to emphasize it's not done yet, but we're seeing really good early results. And for us, this means a couple things: quality of life. And one of the issues here is if you don't get that hearing aid tuned up, you spend days, weeks, months with your world out of focus. You can't hear well. You might not hear something. You might not have an accident. So the quality of life is really important. Another aspect of this that we think is important is that a lot of the cost of getting there, both in time and money, falls on the veteran. How can we reduce that? So we think it's a win-win all the way around. Now I'm going to go to the other side of the equation and talk a little bit about, so what do we mean in terms of this kind of engagement with the patient? And we've stood up an office called the Office of Patient-Centered Care and Cultural Transformation. And at the heart of this is changing this relationship. And in this, I think we share a lot with the private sector, and I'm going to read a little bit to you from an article from Health Affairs that was published in May of 2012. And this is based on a study that was done in Palo Alto with about 50 folks, and I think we can all probably assume that Palo Alto is not the home of the most disenfranchised folks in the country. And the findings were pretty unanimous, that patients reported that authoritarian physicians and the patient's fear of being labeled difficult were among the key obstacles to shared decision-making. That even relatively affluent and well-educated patients feel compelled to conform to socially sanctioned roles and defer to physicians during clinical consultations, and that physicians can be authoritarian, and that the fear of being categorized as difficult prevents patients from participating more fully in their own health care. So often when we talk about, the system and what we can do to the system, the language and sometimes sounds like patient engagement is yet another treatment being kind of pushed onto the patient by the system, that their change in behavior is the outcome we seek. So I think one of the questions we have to ask is, what does this mean to the individual? Is this a two-way street? And how do we construct a dialogue, to go back to Secretary Shinseki's objective, that empowers patients to improve their own well-being? That health ultimately has to be owned by the individual, not by the system. So that's the range of topics that we're working across. Just to give you a few, just a sense of who we are as the Veterans Health Administration. And these numbers astounded me when I heard them, but we are doing 236,000 healthcare appointments per day. We do 1,100 surgeries per day, and this is across 151 medical centers, 821 outpatient patient clinics, and 300 vet centers. So one of the advantages that we have, that we hope to employ in this, is our scale, that we have kind of great resources to apply to it, and finally the fact that we are we're not constrained by the fee-for-service model that so deeply drives the behaviors, that what I would call the treatment-centric construct that drives the private healthcare system. So I think I'm going to leave you with just a couple of thoughts. That the key drivers for us are looking across that spectrum of activities on the technology side, from connectedness, how do we reach out to the individual where they live, to the use of data, which we think is we are just at the beginning of that journey. How do we understand it? How do we think about it? How do we use it to provide value? And then how do we change the dialogue so that we all are the captains of our own healthcare ships? So thank you. I look forward to the dialogue later.
Thank you, Patrick. Our next presenter is Mr. Craig Kurzweil, who's the Senior Vice President, Analytic Innovations, United Health Group.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here today. I apologize in advance for my voice. I'm not usually a baritone, but I'm losing my voice, so in case things go awry, that's what's happening. As Dr. McGillory mentioned, I'm here to talk about how United Health Group is uniquely positioned to help transform America's healthcare system with a focus on technology and innovation. As we look across the system, United Health Group has the opportunity to serve a wide variety of different constituents, ranging from 250,000 different plan sponsors. This would be large employers, small employers, and even individuals across the system. 85 million different consumers interact with the United Health Group in one way or another across a given year. And in the end of the day, 820,000 different healthcare providers. This provides United Health Group with a unique opportunity to see across the whole healthcare system, but it also provides us a lot of data. As those members drive claims, as those providers produce services, and as those plan sponsors interact with their membership, a lot of data is distributed across the system. And what I'll focus on today is how we're leveraging that data across both the plan sponsors, the consumers, and the providers as well. The goal of our organization is really embedded on data. So the other speakers talked about analytics and the focus on leveraging big data. That's really the basis of all the different innovations that we have and that I'll showcase today. Taking big data, claims data in particular, and being able to disseminate that and turn that into insights is a key objective of a lot of our technology. From there, we also focus on different ways that we can take that data and not only turn it into insights, but then take that data and allow it to be engaged by the consumer, enabling tools such as ways to navigate the system. And I'll show you a couple of examples of how we're able to do that. And at the end of the day, making sure that the data not only allows for enabling tools to navigate the system, but also allows the members the appropriate incentives to drive better health decisions, to promote wellness, and to promote providers to provide the best possible quality care in the system as well. And at the end of the day, the goal is really challenging to take all of that big data, leverage it to actionable information that can drive not just data for data's sake, but really drive solutions and drive innovation in the healthcare system. One way that we do that is a tool we call the Health Plan Manager. So in working with our plan sponsors, they, like everyone in the system, is really engaged in trying to identify what are their trend drivers, what are their opportunities, and what can they do about it. So in managing big data, we have to find ways to make it visual so that we can really understand where are the opportunities within a population and really focus in on population health analytics when we dive into it. So with this display, you can see the heat map, which is, I'm sure, hard to read for the audience. But what we're showing here is the primary conditions that are driving this population's cost, with the number one condition that you can't read is the cardiovascular disease. But the number two condition is actually diabetes. The size of the squares, the size of the cost, and the intensity of the colors, the intensity of the trend. So in this population, we're actually seeing that diabetes is the number two primary condition from a cost perspective, and it's actually the number one condition when it comes to a trend perspective. Just the tip of the iceberg, but a way to kind of take all that claims data and quickly identify where is the opportunity, where do we need to start our analysis, and where do we need to focus our solutions. From there, it's not just identifying where the prevalence of a condition is or where the cost of a condition is. At the end of the day, again, as the other speakers mentioned, it really is about the decisions that members make on a day-to-day level, on a day-to-day basis. So we actually go through a tool we call the Consumer Activation Index that goes through and analyzes and grades and scores all those different decisions that we all make on an annual basis. Do we get wellness visits? Do we get cancer exams if we're the appropriate age, gender? If we have a condition like heart disease, diabetes, and asthma, are we managing that condition? Are we seeing the highest quality physicians? Are we going to the ER for appropriate reasons? All those kind of blocking and tackling decisions we evaluate across all of our plan sponsors and all of our populations to see where are those opportunities and where are members making poor decisions, and then how can we help them make better decisions. One area of particular concern is obviously diabetics. And there's a wide range of different decision points, evidence-based medicine metrics that diabetics are supposed to adhere to on an annual basis. And a key part of the Consumer Activation Index is making sure that those diabetics are reaching those different goals. And as you can see through this display, there's a number of different measures that we're measuring here. And in particular, we have 760 diabetics in this sample population that haven't had their hemoglobin A1C test twice in the last 12 months. From there, we actually dive further. And we can take any metric within this tool and start to disseminate it by subpopulation. Not only are there diabetics that are not compliant with this specific measure, but exactly who are we talking about? Not names, but what population are we talking about? Is it a certain market? Is it employees? Is it spouses? Or is it a certain different work unit within a population? So that the plan sponsors and United Healthcare can partner on a specific targeted intervention to that targeted community that's struggling. From there, we realize that understanding the population is important, but in order to understand the population, you really have to understand the individual. And through a tool we call eSync, we're able to, again, mine that same data that we're using to do those population health analytics to really understand exactly who in the population needs help. So in going through all the different data we're getting, whether it's biometric data, health assessment data, claims data, pharmacy data, medical data, we take all that data, churn through that data, and determine a health profile for every individual in the population. What are their conditions? What treatments are they seeking? And where do we see some of the diagnostic tests that are coming in? From there, we leverage evidence-based medicine over the top of that experience to understand we know what conditions you have, we know what sort of treatments you're undergoing. Are there some gaps in care? Are there some opportunities that you should be undertaking but aren't at this point? And from there, knowing the types of claims and the types of conditions that individuals have, we can then outreach to those individuals, especially the sickest of the sick, those with the highest risk of being next year's high-cost claimant, of being in the hospital next week, so that we can flag them in the system and reach out to them at an opportune time. This is actually the screen that our nurses see that can identify all the different gaps in care that a member would have. And for chronic population, there can be dozens of different gaps in care. So we actually allow the nurses to understand if you only get a couple minutes with the individual, what's the order of the conversation? What do you talk about first, second, third? And always, if you can read on the top of the sheet, it's always promoting that engagement with the primary care physician, and a high quality one at that. From there, we also make sure that we have different ways to engage the population. It's not just calling out to a population. There's lots of different ways that our members want to be engaged. And we try to modify our tools and our innovations to be able to reach that member where they need to be met and when they need to be met. So we have different capabilities such as reaching out via phone, but we also look at text messaging, email alerts, mail reminders through the regular mail, lots of different ways to engage the population. And every member wants to be reached in a different way, and we're trying to adapt to all that technology as that advances as well. We also have enabling tools. As I mentioned, we need to make sure that the members, especially as members are promoted, as plan sponsors are promoting consumerism, making sure that members have a stake in the game and are true consumers of healthcare, the members need the tools to actually be consumers. So we have tools, and everyone has a smartphone these days, so we're leveraging that as well to take all that kind of navigation capability and putting it on that kind of technology to make sure that through this technology, you can use the GPS within your phone to identify where is the nearest urgent care, convenience care clinic, or ER if you need it. Where are your medical claims? Where they're processing through? Where are you with your plan deductible or out-of-pocket max? And even more important, how do we? One second, I'm sorry. And even more importantly, what tools do we have to allow the consumer to actually shop for care, to shop for the best doctor, the highest quality doctor, the most efficient doctor, as well as down to the detail of identifying different procedures that are out there in full transparency to allow the consumer to really be a consumer, to shop for care, to shop for quality, and to shop for cost if needed. Another way that we engage the individual is to try to combat illness before it becomes an illness. So one of the innovations that we have is actually trying to prevent diabetes through a program that engages those pre-diabetics at that critical time in their life, when if we can engage them at that point and actively engage them in losing a few pounds, we can actually prevent them converting over to full-fledged diabetes. And through this innovation, as was discussed earlier, diabetes is an issue across the country and is exploding when it comes to the cost of the care across the system. When you look at the individual as a pre-diabetic all the way to a diabetic and down to the touchdown of the diabetic that leads to further complications and issues down the road, the cost can be extreme. And how do we stop that train from leaving the station? We actually engage that diabetic in a pre-diabetic program that allows us to understand where they are in that progression and how can we engage them early on to make sure that if they understand the math of if you lose 5%, if you lose 10% of your body weight, you can actually stop this progression. You can stop from becoming a full-fledged diabetic and actually lead a normal life without it converting over to diabetes. As members engage in that program, a coaching program, in coordination with the YMCA, the more that members actually engage the program, the more that they attend these sessions, the more weight that they lose, and the better success we have with preventing the progression of that critical disease. We also have the ability to then engage the plan sponsors in different ways to incent the population. And a lot of especially in the commercial world, those plan sponsors are really trying to engage different ways to incent their members to make those better choices. As we mentioned the Consumer Activation Index earlier, a lot of members make a lot of poor choices, myself included, and we need to find ways to give those members the right incentives to lead to better health. This is looking at the trend. The trend in the light blue line up above is the industry trend, and the dark blue down below is actually for United Health Group, the employer. And over the years, you can see that trend for the United Health Group has actually been lower. We were one of the early adopters when it came to consumer-driven healthcare and driving consumerism within our population. But then trend did start to escalate and started to catch up with where the industry was. And then we started to adopt this engagement activity with our membership to drive them to, first of all, understand your numbers, know where you are with your disease, know where your cholesterol is, your BMI is, your blood pressure is. And now we're at the point of not only rewarding them knowing the numbers, but if you know your numbers and you know there's an opportunity, close that gap, get some help, try to make some improvements on your health, and reward that member for making those critical decisions. These are some of the early, These are some of the early results from that sort of activity. If you take a population like United Health Group, engage them with the right incentives, with the right consumer tools, you can see that we can actually drive better decisions and better health within a population. Take the hemoglobin A1C metric, for example, and see that we were a healthier population in adopting that metric across our diabetics. But now we've taken that and we're approaching 90% for compliance of that rate, when a normal population is in the 50-55% range. So with the appropriate tools, with the appropriate incentives in place, you really can drive better decisions in a population and lower cost. My last comment is this is just kind of a glimpse of some of the tools that we have across United Health Group. Like Dr. Migler mentioned, I'd offer that there are some further examples that we have down in the lobby. We'd be happy to show those to you if you are willing to stop by after the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, now we'll open up the panel to questions. Or not.
Hi, this question is for Dr. Deneen. And thank you for your service, certainly, and we appreciate you being here today. You had mentioned in your comments, and I really appreciated your analogy to football. It helped me get it, so thank you. But you had mentioned in your comments about working towards keeping people alive longer with a longer quality of life. And in medicine, we're very good at being collaborative. We work amongst the services to try to come up with the best care plan for our patients. And I'm just wondering if we're working collaboratively across our nation from an economic perspective, from an environmental perspective, because while I'm all about keeping people alive longer and healthier, we have a finite planet. We have, our space is only so big, and with a population of 7 billion people on it, are we going to outgrow our planet? Are we going to get ourselves into an economic situation with people? We're talking at a huge level, pension reforms, because people will be living longer and it'll need to collect longer. We'll be looking at needs on our, a burden on our federal government longer. It could increase our poverty level because we'll have fewer jobs. So are we working in a medical community collaboratively with the business community and the economic world, as well as the environmental world, to make sure that we don't have some unintended consequences?
Wow, what a sort of overarching question. I think the only thing I would say to that is that there have been concerns in the public health community voiced for years that if we address something like immunizations for children and get children to be able to live longer, will they only then suffer later in life because there isn't enough food for them? Those kinds of questions. Those are philosophical questions. I don't know that I'm prepared to be able to talk to. What I would say in terms of our system is that for those people that are already on the earth, what can we do to improve, I think, as you said, their well-being? And that I think if we reduce the amount of suffering in the world by getting people to avoid chronic illness, they'll continue to be contributors to the positive things about what's on the earth longer and make life sort of better for everyone else around them. So that I feel sort of unequivocally positive about the effort to promote health over sickness, and then leave the more challenging questions about, how many children you have, that kind of thing, to others to address from a policy standpoint. Great question.
Mike, great to see you again. I didn't get the football analogy, but that's beside the point. So, question to the panel. My name is Han Pak, CMO of Longview. I heard a little bit about patient engagement and how we are beginning to measure and try to activate the patients towards certain behavioral changes. I know VA with the connected health that we're supporting on mobile, definitely getting there. I know that DoD's been a leader in telehealth. What I see missing is some of the big research that is needed to begin to understand why Joe and Mary behave and act differently, even based on the same parameters, because of some of the social economic factors and other preferences and other individual factors that we're having very difficult now that we've connected with mobile and others to the patient's home or at the individual level. We still don't know why one person does one thing, the other person does another, and beginning to understand how do we go about doing that. What kind of research or investments is the federal sector particularly making? Because I think that the larger technology group and others are waiting for that kind of answers to come.
Let me just say one thing about that. As a sort of a student of this business of healthcare to health, an area that I've gotten into in the last 4 or 5 years is the area of behavioral economics. And I think it's almost required reading of anyone who's thinking about this issue, this book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, which talks about this idea that people one of his students, Daniel Ariely, wrote another book called Predictably Irrational, and it talks about this issue that people are irrational about things, particularly in health, that we value near-term rewards much more than long-term rewards, and a lot of what we're asking people to do in improving their health is to put off near-term pleasure for long-term survival. And one of the questions, and where we really need a lot of help and innovation, is to figure out those incentives that turn long-term goodness into near-term rewards. And there's actually an office set up to do what's called nudges, which was an idea that came across from Cass Sunstein and others, where you actually have the architecture of a choice change to do what Dr. Woodson talked about, which is to make the healthy choice the easy choice. And so as I drive home past a McDonald's, why am I going to drive into the gym rather than go into the McDonald's? And what can we do to incentivize that? So I think what you see is places like United Healthcare and others that are figuring out incentives that are maybe not financial incentives, but are just changes in the way we present choices to people so that when they can choose something that's healthier over something that's not. For those who haven't heard this particular example, one example which was striking to me and was one of the reasons I kept reading in this is that there are 4 countries in Europe that have organ donation rates of less than 20%. And there are 4 countries in Europe that have organ donation rates that are greater than 80%. And, it's like Finland versus Norway. And you say, well, what's the difference? Is it great marketing efforts? Is it great this, that, and the other? Well, long story short, the only difference between the two is that one of them says the 4 countries that are getting much worse have on their driver's license, please tell us if you want to be an organ donor. And the ones that have over 80% have, please tell us if you don't want to be an organ donor. And for complex decisions, we tend to take the first thing that's offered to us. So if we could just get around the issue of choice architecture and innovate in that sphere, I think we could address some of these issues that have to do with behavioral change. On the other hand, I want to be sure to say that it's not easy. But I think we have to learn from organizations outside of healthcare for that. The marketing world knows a lot about how to get people to change their behaviors. Others know a lot about this, and so we have to be willing to learn from others and not think that we have the answers within healthcare to these issues, which is the holy grail, is how do you get people to change their behaviors so that they become more healthy as they get older and more susceptible to illness, and put off near-term, Big Macs for long-term no high blood pressure.
If I just could add on to that, I think that John Woodson touched on this also, Dr. Woodson, when he said that there's a vast amount of research going on. We don't really have the handle on why somebody here would behave different or react different than somebody else, although we're still the same species. And neuropharmacology, neurobiology, neurophysiology, why we are wired the way we are. And I think as research progresses in that area, and it's being done in more and more places every day, and a lot more of the research, the evil part of that is to then try to control people's behavior through some external means. But put that aside, and if we can figure out what makes people think the way they do or why they think differently, then we can engineer what you call the nudge or the nudge to get a better response out of folks. And I think that's the wave of the future.
Yeah, and a quick add to that. I mean, I think one of the opportunity areas is the combination of what I call social demographic data with healthcare data. And I heard a very interesting presentation about a week ago whose fundamental kind of thrust was that we in healthcare do a lousy job of segmenting our customers, that we tend to assume that anybody who's got heart failure that they're all the same, and the fact is that they're not. And his theme was this fellow named Jeff Brenner was that P&G would never make the mistake that we in healthcare do, which is assume that everybody who's got COPD is the same. So at another level, I think it is that we'll take diet issues as related to weight and health. We've looked into different diets at VA and how do you change people's diets, and there's been a lot of detailed research work around. Not a lot, but there's the beginning of research about the neurobiology of it. But then there's all these social dynamics which often get lost in the shuffle, like the fact that the reason you don't change is because your wife or your husband is the cook, and they don't cook the food, the healthy food. So it's really simple. It's not complicated, but it's part of this broader social dynamic. So, and I think the area that the area you're poking at is multidimensional, needs to be tackled at multiple levels, and is indeed one of the opportunity areas.
The only piece that I'd add to that is I think the socioeconomic piece is critical, but I think also the geography. I think Dr. Brenner, the same sort of geographic hotspotting that you've seen in the industry, I think that's critical. And not just looking at specific markets, but what we're finding is we can identify critical communities, city blocks, that kind of analytics, applying big data to that kind of specificity. Where you live has a lot to do with your health, and whether it's the amount of McDonald's that you have down the street or what sort of walking paths you have in your environment, the community health analytics are really leading us to identify specific communities that have unique opportunities, and can we help leverage the resources in the communities to help impact those various environments.
One final comment on this. I think it is going to take a collaboration across private sector or public to tackle these things, and we all bring different resources to it. And before I want to give a nod to our colleagues at United Health, that we at the Center of Innovation have a partnership with United Health, and it's our goal is to develop more public-private partnerships to facilitate dialogues, especially these areas where, for example, we may have data, when other people have analytic capabilities, and how do we put this together actually to achieve the greater good?
And if I could say something that's been striking, one last thing that's striking to me is that I'm an example, an anecdote of what is more generalizable, and that is that when people get out of the military, we found from the data that we've got that they gain approximately 20 pounds in the first 2 or 3 years that they've gotten out of the military. And how does that relate to the question that was asked? And one of the things is there's a sociologist up at Harvard that's been looking at the question, if you respect people who are overweight and they're friends of yours, you're more likely to be overweight. So the question is, could we build a culture like that of the military where there is a respect for those that are in shape to do the mission of readiness, and translate that into the same sort of thing that we actually build more respect for those people that keep themselves fit, and that not only is, that may be politically challenging to do, but on the other hand, it may be something that would help the entire country start to turn the corner and reduce the rate of obesity. So there are sociological, there are psychological, and then economic issues that have to be thought of to reverse this trend we've got in the country towards going more unhealthy.
Hi, how you doing? My name is Damon Mathis, and I recently arrived at the Directorate of Reserve Affairs for the Office of the Army Surgeon General, and I have two comments. One's a political announcement, and then the other's another question. But before I do, great job, Mr.
Are you running for office, Damon?
I am, sir. I am. Great job, Mr. Kurtz. We're empowering through your presentation. Way to hang in there. The first one is, upon arriving at the Surgeon General's office, and I know all the other components, they're doing great things too, but I only have an exposure to what she's doing right now, is this system for health that she stood up, this performance triad, this focus on sleep, activity, and nutrition lends itself immeasurably to the reserve components. How do we get at soldiers in their living rooms when they're not being soldiers? So I throw that out on behalf of her, and I throw it out to other people to look at that performance triad, because what we're talking about over this continuum of care, this continuum of health, I think, I really do, and I probably obviously have some biases, but I knew nothing about it before I arrived at the Surgeon General's office. And here's the problem. As we in the Reserve Affairs Office have tried to sell it to our own reserve components, the question we get, or the pushback we get, is, hey, sounds great, but what is it? And that initial sell, but once you have a conversation about sleep, activity, nutrition, living a healthy lifestyle, myself, having been in the Army in the Army Reserves in the Army for 30 years, I now have to come up with smarter ways, post-hip replacement, post steroid injections, to figure out that just burning calories is not the way to stay healthy. That you have, I can't get on a treadmill anymore for, an hour and a half, 2 hours, and, run off whatever it was I was doing the night before. You have to live a healthy lifestyle, and so I would throw that out to you. The second thing I would ask, since we have VA and DHA here, is what's an interesting conundrum for me is the information sharing that needs to go on to take the information that we have on soldiers, and so I'm interested in what is on the horizon out there that you all see, and I'm not saying that you're the spokesman to say that, but if you know of any, what information sharing agreements do you see on the horizon that we will be able to get at so we can continue this collaboration that we all talk about?
So, first of all, I anticipated that the question around kind of information sharing between DoD and VA might come up. And I clearly thought of that too late. So first of all, that is not my domain, so I'm hesitant to speak about an area that I'm really not familiar with. I do know it continues to be an area where we need to do better, where everybody, and we have a history of kind of making plans and not getting as far as we need to. So I think I'm just going to acknowledge that is an area where we need continued work and leave it at that, because I think if I go beyond that, I'll misstate something and make somebody unhappy. So duly noted.
So one thing, I just want to support what you said about General Horoho and her effort. Just amazing what she's done in terms of supporting the performance triad and whole idea of actually making it a reality to reach beyond those few minutes that people touch the healthcare system each year into their homes where they live, to begin to address their ability to change their behaviors to promote health. I can tell you that one space for innovation, which sounds tremendously positive to me, is the area of these kinds of things. I have something called a polar loop on my arm, but I've also used a Fitbit, and there's something called a Strive, and there's others. I think the next generation is going to be dealing with the privacy issues of letting my doctor see the data that's coming out of this thing on my arm, so that when I go into a visit with my doctor is empowered with what I've been doing during the time that I wasn't in to see my doctor. And so that they can offer me better and more targeted advice onto what I can do to actually create a strategic plan for myself, for my health. And so I think that's the next generation that, you know, she's forging us into is how do we get data beyond claims data? I think what United Health has done is amazing, but now we have to say, what other kind of data do we need to understand the health factors and the health drivers outside of the time people are actually touching the healthcare system? And I think the military can help with that because, you know, health is so tremendously important to the special operations folks, to the people that are, you know, that need people to be operating well above normal levels of fitness. So I think we can contribute to that dialogue because, and also to the elite sports teams. If you see the folks on elite sports teams, they're always being monitored, right? And so I think that's going to be the deal, is how do we extend the data we get from just when people are touching the healthcare system to when they're living their lives, so that when they do touch the healthcare system, we can give them better and more targeted advice for how to improve their health. We become the trusted partner in their health rather than the person that fixes the problem when they get broken.
I got to jump in on this, and I think well said. I want to support your comments, particularly around being a trusted partner. I'll say within VA, one of the issues that we hear constantly from our physicians is that they are now overwhelmed with data sources coming in from all mediums, whether it's your device, and I have my Fitbit here. And it's almost impossible in today's environment for that to be integrated in any kind of coherent way to make it sensible. So there's a couple pieces of this that are important. One is that flow is only going to escalate. It is that we are seeing now, what we're seeing now is the tip of the iceberg, right? So it raises a fundamental question, which is what is the kind of informational construct that allows us to use it well, and who is the user? And I, be a little provocative here. I'll say I would argue that the medical record as a construct is utterly unsuited to this. It's retrospective, it's documentary, and what we're really looking at is something that's more of a real-time dashboard of who you are and how are all the parts working. And then embedded in that is the whole question of ownership. Is this you? Is this yours? Who's driving the ship, or is it the physicians? Is this something that we produce for the medical system? Is it something that we own, and to your point, provide to the medical system in a partner relationship? So, and I too think it's incredibly exciting. It's one of these kind of future opportunities that I think has the power to change our view and experience of health on multiple dimensions. So.
We have time for one more question. Or not.
Well, I just have 3 comments. Over here, sir. I used to work for General Kasulki myself, so.
And she's alive still, wow.
Barely. Sure. My first comment is about the Healthy Base Initiative. The Army's had the CHIPIC process, the Community Health Promotion process, in place for several years. And yes, indeed, it does work. So as you develop that Healthy Base Initiative, I would ask that you take in consideration the work that's already been done out there. And actually the Air Force has the CABE process too. So it's already there, and I guess that's it. The second comment is for you, sir, is the technology is great, the smartphone and the applications are all great, but I guess I would request that there's always a person behind that, because what patients want and what soldiers want, I'll speak Army, is a relationship that you've already mentioned about trust and how we trust our healthcare provider so that they know somebody's there to back them up if they need help. So that's one comment. And then my last comment, and actually, sir, you've kind of mentioned it or kind of touched on it, is do we have the right policies and procedures in place to actually get the military members and their families to all this wonderful thing that we've just been talking about? The soldiers at the edge, and again, I'll speak Army, don't have the education or the knowledge of all this out there and all this information that they can get to help them. That's where I see as the biggest issue, is how do we get this help to those who really need it out there in the middle of Montana or Nebraska or Kansas, where we really do have veterans who have the VA care but may not know some of this other stuff that's out there and available. Thank you.
Could I make one comment on that? So I concur wholeheartedly about the need to kind of improve access, and that's part of our approach with connected health and so on and so forth. At maybe a little deeper level, the Center for Innovation is currently working with our mental health services team around how do we kind of, in a sense, reach out to people where they live on this important issue. And I don't think we know the answer yet, but the questions that are being asked are, how do we improve the acceptability of these services? And it goes to the question of, if your mental model is that mental health means going and lying on somebody's couch for an hour, well, there's a whole lot of folks who that doesn't work for them anymore. So we've got to find where they live and in a sense, meet them halfway. We can't wait for them to come to the system. So we're, through a broad agency announcements, trying to solicit ideas from the private sector and folks who have good ideas in this around, is it gamification, is it social media, and we don't know. But these are questions we do need to ask, and we're trying to ask them as best we can.
Two quick comments. Number one, I was working on the Healthy Base Initiative, and that began as a collaboration with the Army Public Health Command and the Navy and the Air Force together, working with other parts of the Department of Defense to put that all together. But I think there's another success story here, and that General Robb, who heads the Defense Health Agency, one of the 10 shared services that's been created is public health. And it's a recognition that we all need to learn from one another and capitalize on those success stories so that we move to the next generation of goodness. The next thing I'd say, though, is as a psychiatrist, I think we do have to remember that one of the things we want to absolutely preserve as we move forward with these innovations is those moments of intimacy between a patient and their doctor. And that, one of the things that I was honored to be able to do for a number of years was have those moments when it was just me and the patient talking in a critical conversation about something that was life-changing for them. And so as we talk about these innovations, something to preserve is that ability of there to be very high quality time between someone who is a trusted partner and someone who's going through a very difficult time in their life and needs some very, very valuable advice. So I appreciate your sort of challenging us to keep that balance.
Well, I think that we all owe a round of applause to our panelists here. I think in a quiet moment, either later this afternoon when you have some time to reflect on what you've heard today, that you would come to the conclusion very quickly, something that a fellow named Robert Zimmerman wrote a lyric to. Robert Zimmerman, for those who don't know, was Bob Dylan in his stage name, and he wrote, "The times they are changing," and they're changing pretty fast. If you could imagine what you've heard about today as far as systems and systems development, analysis of megadata, 10 years ago, none of this existed. It was the historical record, and it's still historical record for the most part, but these changes are coming, and this is the cusp of, we're in the future. The future is now. So thank you all for giving up part of your day to present to us, and I hope you all learned something here. Thank you. Well, you're quite welcome. Thank you.